I'm Brandon Gentle, and this is Gentle Earth Boat Works. I'm building a 22-foot sailboat right here in the boat shed in my backyard. It's a design called the Penguin by John Welsford, and this boat's meant to go places. It's got a queen-size v-berth, a couple of steady bunks, a galley, and a head. So if you're a person that enjoys big DIY projects, a woodworker, a boat builder, this channel's for you. Today, we're going to be starting on the bottom panel of the sailboat. So let's take a quick look at the plans before we get started. So this is the bottom panel, and you notice everything is in metric. So if you're in the States like I am, get yourself a millimeter tape measure if you're building one of John Welsford's boats. But the bottom panel is constructed of 6 separate pieces. So he suggests scarfing together 3 pieces for each half, and then cutting out the shape and then joining them down the center with the Kilson board. I'm going to be deviating a little bit from that. This is assuming 4x8 sheets of plywood. I was able to get 2 5x10 sheets. So this is about 18 feet 4 inches, about 4.5 feet wide total for the bottom panel. So I could get it with the 2 5x10 sheets and only have to do 1 scarf joint. So that's what I'm going to do. Other than that, everything else will be the same. The plans call for an 8-to-1 scarf joint. So here I'm just setting my speed square for a 4-inch offset and scribing that line, so that way I'll have a good guide to go by when I make the joint. So I have a confession to make. This is the first time I had ever attempted making a scarf joint. So I went out to the local hardware store and bought a really cheap power plane, and it did the trick. So the key is just to take your time and work slowly and evenly. And the plies and the plywood really help you gauge how you're doing. If you keep those reveals even with the plies as you go along, you can really get a very accurate angle, and you can come back and check it with a straight edge and then clean it up. Well, after about an hour and 15 minutes, I'd gotten to the point where I was just about ready to call it good. So here I am finishing up, feathering the edges out with a palm sander, and I used like a 80 grit and then a 120 and left it at that. And as you can see here, you can really see those different laminations in the ply, and how if you keep them nice and even and straight, you know you've got a nice good angle. So here I'm measuring out epoxy. It's a 3-to-1, so I got 3 pumps of resin to 1 pump of catalyst. It's a medium cure, so it gives you plenty of open time, 15-20 minutes to work with it. And once I get this mixed up, then we will apply that to the joint just to wet it out. Then we'll go back and we'll mix up another batch of glue after that. So as anyone knows, working with epoxy, you mix and you mix and you mix. And when you think you've got it, then you mix a little more, and then you're probably close. So here I'm just taking a cheap 2-inch chip brush, and I'm using it to wet out each side of the scarf joint. So you got a little bit of a break there on the corner, but maybe they're really fragile when they get tapered out that far and that thin. But each side's going to have about 3 inches trimmed off of it whenever I cut out the shape of the bottom panel, so no harm, no foul. Next step was to mix up some epoxy glue. So I just take and mix my epoxy like I did in the first step, except this time I add wood flour to thicken it. And I just add wood flour until it gets to about the consistency of mayonnaise. It's spreadable, but it doesn't really sag a lot, and so then I just take that and slather it on the joint. So here I've got the wet out joints, and then I just take my glue that I just made up, and I just use a popsicle stick, and I try to spread it out nice and even across the joint. Then the next step is just to join the two pieces. And a 5x10 sheet is kind of awkward to handle by yourself, but it wasn't that bad. The way the jig is, it works as a really good surface for a table, basically, to work off of. So I got the piece of plywood flipped over and got them lined up and set in place. I weighted the joint down with my little pancake air compressor and some weights, and then let it sit overnight to cure. Well, after a week I was able to come back to it, so here I am working on laying out all the points on the curves based on the plans. See, every 250 millimeters, John calls out the offset from the center of the panel. That's what I'm laying out here. And at each one of the points, I pounded in a finish nail. And as I got all those lined up in the nice shape of the bottom panel, it would appear. And then I could lay out a fair curve. Next, I used a batten and clamped it to each one of the finish nails so that way I could strike my curve. And the batten I use, I just cut from a piece of ash lumber that I had, a thin 1/8 inch strip, 3/4 of an inch wide. And I've used ash from just about anywhere I'm using a hardwood on this project so far. And it's been kind of my go-to hardwood. It bends easily, it takes epoxy well, looks a lot like white oak. You know, a lot of people would think it was oak if they didn't know, but that's what I've been using. So now it was finally time to cut out that bottom panel. And I just used a skill saw. I guess you could use a jigsaw for this as well, but I think the skill saw is a lot easier to make a nice curve with. The key is just to make sure that you don't have your blade extended too far. Your blade should just be deep enough to go through the material that you're cutting through whenever you're wanting to cut a nice curve, otherwise it'll bind on you. So I've got mine set just a little more than a 1/2 inch for this 1/2 inch plywood, and just took my time and stayed right by the line, and I think it turned out pretty good. Well, now that we had the bottom panel cut, that's it for this episode. Next time, we'll be getting the Kilson board set. We'll put in the chine logs down each side. We'll set the curvature for the bottom, and then we'll glue it all up. And then hopefully we'll have a finished part. So until then, thanks for watching.